by making sure that we know that I'm here, your field coordinator in Grand Rapids. My name is Vicki Pelini. Rosemary Andrews is our field coordinator in Kalamazoo. And we're missing tonight, but thinking about Marion Triplett, who is our field director and also the coordinator of field for the Benton Harbor campus. Alyssa Hobson is our most fabulous graduate assistant who will be helping us this coming academic year. So that is your field team. Know that any of us will help you any way that we can. If you have questions as you move forward, your supervisor in your placement and your liaison or your classroom professor would be your first line for questions. But know that any of the rest of us will help you, whether you're a Benton Harbor, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo student, whether you ask Alyssa, Rosemary, Marion, or myself, we'll figure out whatever we can do to help support you and your success in your field placement.
Hey, Vicki, we do have a request for you to speak up just a little louder.
Okay, so is this a little bit better? Can you guys hear if I talk a little bit louder like that? Better?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so let's start with who's who in the field office. We've made a concerted effort this year to try to minimize all the different words and descriptors and names that we give to folks in field, but you still will probably come across some names that can be confusing at times. When we talk about our field education director, we're talking about Marion Triplett, who is not with us tonight, but who is also our field coordinator in Benton Harbor. That means that Marion not only oversees what we're doing in the field office, but also helps make good matches with students for the Benton Harbor campus. A field coordinator is just exactly that. So Marion does that for Benton Harbor, Rosemary does that for Kalamazoo, and I do that for Grand Rapids. Our field office graduate assistant is a student who helps us with all of the administrative tasks that we have in field. This year it's Alyssa Hobson, and she'll be with us for both fall and spring semester. You'll hear of field instructor and field supervisor, sometimes described as the same person. You might get confused. Are we talking about my supervisor that supervises my work? Are we talking about somebody who instructs my work? This is the same person. And most of the things that we've done this year have been to combine that wording into just one descriptor as a field supervisor. That's the person who works with you from your organization, supports your internship work. You may occasionally see field instructor, same person, but hopefully by this time next year, we will have phased out field instructor as a descriptor. Some of you have a secondary field instructor, and that would be for those of you who are in a placement where your primary supervisor, the person that you work with every day, either does not have an MSW or they have an MSW that's less than 2 years old, that they've been out in the field for less than 2 years. So for example, we might have a student that has got an awesome internship opportunity with somebody who is trained in psychology. Some of our macro students have a supervisor who might be a master's in business administration. So we don't want to take away from that kind of opportunity, but we do want to make sure that you're still getting the supervision about being an MSW that you need. We wouldn't expect somebody who is trained in business to know about our code of ethics, to know about our continuing education, our exams, what our licensing requirements are. That's not something we would expect them to know. So some of you may have a secondary supervisor, and that's exactly what we would expect that supervisor or secondary field instructor does. They would meet with you twice a month to talk about things that are specific to being an MSW and a long-term MSW. So somebody that has been out in the field less than 2 years with their degree might not have the same sort of reflective experience to draw upon as somebody who's been out many years more than that. So a secondary field instructor or secondary field supervisor would be somebody that would bridge that gap. It might be somebody at your organization, or you might be joining a group that we have here at school. If you have questions about that, please contact your coordinator so we can clarify what that plan is for you. Your faculty liaison and your classroom instructor, those are also the same person. That's the person that is going to run your field class, whether you meet every other week, every week, or once a month. That's the person who is going to have your syllabus, who will have assignments, academic assignments for you to complete while you're in field, and who will work with you and your supervisor to be a connection back to the university while you're in your field placement. Ultimately, this is the person who will give you your grade, who will give you an A through an E if you're in your foundation placement, or a credit, no credit if you're in your advanced standing and or concentration placement. So your faculty liaison and classroom instructor are the same person. Your foundation field student, that would be many of you on the call tonight who are completing a 400-hour internship. A foundation field placement means that you are not coming from an undergraduate in social work, generally speaking, and you are starting the first of 2 internships that will be 400 hours starting in the fall and finishing in the spring. Concentration field students at the same time are folks that are either doing their second of 2 internships, or they are advanced standing, meaning that they've come from a BSW placement and a BSW undergraduate, and they are doing a one and done. Advanced standing essentially means you have come from an accredited BSW program and that you've graduated with a certain grade point minimum, that you've completed all of the requirements of that BSW successfully, and that it's been within a certain amount of time that you got your BSW and you enter into your MSW. Extended study field is much the same as concentration. It's another way of explaining somebody who is not coming from an advanced standing background. It means often that you are in classes and field part-time. Part-time MSW is pretty self-explanatory. Intern is also pretty self-explanatory. And finishing up this slide, a PRC is hopefully a couple of letters you will not hear during your placement. A professional review committee
All right, looks like Vicki might have lost internet. It was storming pretty significantly near her house, so I'll just kind of run with it until she comes back. So a professional review committee is a process for when there is problems in your placement or problems in the program. It can be for things as simple as not communicating with your field site and not showing up, all the way to plagiarism in the program. So again, hoping these are words you never hear, but those are some of the things that we use the professional review committee for in our program. So we'll go over field structure. Hopefully a lot of you are a little bit familiar with this, but we'll just kind of cruise through. If you are in your Bachelor of Social Work program, you will have just one placement. You will have 2 courses that go along with the program. Social Work 4100 in the fall and Social Work 4110 in the spring for a total of 400 hours of your field placement. And you will be at the same placement across both of these semesters unless there's problems. A MSW Foundation student, as Vicki had talked about earlier, that is the first of 2 placements in the program. You also have 2 courses that go along with this, 6710 in the fall, 6720 in the spring, also for a total of 400 hours. And then our MSW Concentration is the second of your 2 placements, or if you're advanced standing, it is your only placement. And the requirement for this is 500 hours. You still have the 2 courses across 2 semesters. We look for you to be at about halfway through at the end of your first semester. If you are running behind on hours, we need to know that. It doesn't have to be exactly halfway through, but if you are 100 hours or more short on your hours, we should have a discussion about how we're going to finish up and keep on track with hours. So the field seminar are the courses that go along with your field placement. As we talked about, there are 2 classes for each session. So for bachelor's, 4100, 4110, 6710 and 6720 for foundation, 6760, 6780 for concentration year. And then if you are a PP&A student, a policy planning and administration, it's 6670 and 6790. Your instructor, your field liaison for these courses will stay the same across both semesters. And again, your placement stays the same across both semesters. Along with this course is your liability insurance coverage. This is the professional liability insurance that is provided by the university, and it's attached to those courses. And this is why we say you can't start before classes start, because you're not covered by insurance during that time. It's only applicable when you are registered in the field course. So we're going to talk more about start dates and end dates later on, but that liability insurance is an important component of why you can and can't start. So we do have this nice little visual of how internships are laid out kind of at a glance. Different parts of our forms and contracts are due throughout the semester. And this just kind of lays it out, starting with your onboarding in August. Hopefully all of you are probably about done with any onboarding, fingerprinting, background checks that you needed to have done. There's an orientation and safety checklist that's due early in the semester. Your learning contract and your first liaison visit are about partway through the semester. Generally, when you have about 100 hours completed, is when that first check of your learning contract is going to take place. And you can kind of see how it progresses throughout the semesters. And we do continue it along here on the calendar. Our semester ends April 30th, but we do have kind of this extension into May, June, July for those of you who might be running behind on hours and need to extend past that semester date. I do see a question in the chat of what happens if you're going to hit more hours than are required. That does happen on occasion. Some sites have a requirement of, like, they want you there Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they're not really looking at the end game of how many hours you're reaching. They're looking that you're there to serve their population. Schools is a good example of this. They want you there from the start of the school year to the end of the school year. And so you might be over hours, but if you made a commitment to the agency to be there through certain time periods, you need to fulfill that commitment. Definitely something to talk about early in the placement. Some agencies are fine with, oh, you hit your 400-hour mark and it's only February, then you're done. So that's just a question to have with your instructors ahead of time. So we did talk a little bit about when you can begin your placement, but this is really important. So we're going to go over it a couple of times throughout the presentation. If you are a bachelor's student or in your first foundation placement, we're asking that you do not start in field until after you have attended your first class session. So for most of you, that's by September 13th, you'll have attended that class. Now there is the exception of if you have onboarding to do, IT training, different things like that, but we're asking for no direct client contact until you have had a class session and some contact with your faculty liaison. If you are in your concentration placement, you can go ahead and begin when the semester starts on September 1st. We do advise all students to review your syllabus prior to showing up for your field placement, especially if your field class does not meet right away. It's important to review that syllabus for important Western policies, due dates, information to go over. So scheduling is a big part of your placement, and you're going to want to talk about this. If you didn't talk about it during the interview, now's a good time to reach out to your field supervisor. But to determine your plan early of when you're going to be on schedule with the agency, what days, how many hours a week, all that kind of stuff to have in writing is preferable. That way there's no confusion later on. If it's a conversation that you had like during your interview process or during the onboarding process, just summarize it in an email, send it back to them, just making sure I understand this correctly. This is what we discussed. Most students average between 12 to 16 hours a week at their internship in order to hit their 400 or 500-hour requirement by the end of spring semester. That's definitely negotiable. Some agencies have busier times of the year where they might want you to be present more than 12 hours a week, or they might have times of the year where they're not as busy and they don't have as much for you to do. So keeping track of where you're at on your hours, and again, making sure you're in communication with them is important. So attendance is not required during school breaks. So what that means is if we are on a semester break, such as the break between fall and spring over the holiday season, spring break, Thanksgiving break, you are not required to be in your internship during those times. That being said, a lot of agencies do want you to be on site during those breaks. Certainly they understand if you need to take spring break off because you have a trip planned or anything along those lines. Just again, communicate early with them of what your plans are. And the big question we get is during the break between semesters. So Thanksgiving break and spring break, you're covered by your liability because it's within a semester. But that holiday season in December, you're technically not enrolled in a course, so you're not covered by the liability insurance. So how we work that, if you are going to be in field, is we give you an incomplete in your fall class that extends the insurance liability coverage until spring classes resume. Then a grade is assigned once spring resumes, and spring liability insurance kicks in. So it is definitely possible to work over those holiday breaks. Again, it's up to you and the agency as to how that works. So you can always start your placement late, but you can never go early. You can always extend past the semester deadlines. We can go, if our semester ends April 30th, and you still have hours to work, you can go until you finish hours. We just give you an incomplete in that class and it extends the coverage. But again, no starts before September 1st. We cannot make the insurance start early. So now we're going to get in and talk about IPT. You all should be familiar with how to log in and what the IPT system is. So we're going to talk about some of our forms. You should have all signed your student agreement by now, which was located in your student detail page on this left-hand column in the gray area. You click on My Forms, and that takes you to where you should have 4 forms listed for your placement. Your student agreement should have already been signed. If you haven't signed it yet, please log in tonight and do that. That just shows that you have given us permission to share your information with sites and that you understand our different liability coverage and policies. We also have in there your learning contract and evaluation, where all of your competencies and practice behaviors are laid out. Your safety and orientation checklist, which is what you'll use with your field supervisor to go over all things you need to know at the beginning of your placement. And then your time log, where you're going to track all of your hours and keep track of where you are in your placement. All of these forms will have due dates, but the due date is going to be up to your classroom instructor or your faculty liaison. So again, pay attention to your syllabus, pay attention to what your instructor says. You might have peers in other classes and you're both doing your field placement even at the same site, but you might have different due dates if you have a different instructors of the class. So always pay attention to what's in your documentation. So pretty early in your placement, I like this to be done within the first week of your placement, is your orientation and safety checklist. You're going to work on this with your faculty liaison and people on site at the agency where you're at. We're asking you to really discuss COVID policies in depth early on. And the completion of your orientation and safety checklist generally is tied to a grade with your faculty liaison. So again, important to get this done. When you open up that orientation and safety checklist, you're going to have all these lovely little sections. There's like, I think 8 or 9 sections ranging from field supervision to organization policies, where really we're just giving you kind of a touch point for you to be able to have a conversation with someone on your site to make sure expectations are the same. So you are going to talk about what the expectations are for supervision, what your learning style is, how you're expected to resolve conflict in a site. So oftentimes different agencies have different protocol for who you contact when there's conflicts and issues. You're going to go over the organization policies. What's their social media use policy? Can you use your phone or make recordings or take pictures? Always going over confidentiality policies. There's also a section on there for Western policies where we talk about our insurance requirements and things like that. And then first and foremost to discuss our COVID-19 policies. As we're all aware, things are changing. It seems minute by minute when it comes to COVID. So having the discussion of what the agency's policies are very important even before you start. We know Western has a certain set of policies, which as of this moment in time, it does not require students to be vaccinated. However, we have many sites that are requiring any employees and people that are on site to be fully vaccinated. Or they have policies on quarantining, what to do if you're symptomatic, who to report to if you are COVID positive. I had a site yesterday closed to interns because their case rates were at a certain percentage. So knowing all those things, like at what point do services move remote? And if they move remote as an intern, what am I expected to do? What am I allowed to do? Having those conversations early and having a backup plan are going to be crucial for us again this year, unfortunately. At the bottom of the orientation and safety checklist is a spot for you to put in a tentative field placement schedule. That's not a strict requirement that you have to stick by. That's just another spot for you and your supervisor to have that conversation about what expectations are so that you're both on the same page. The next form is your learning contract. To us, this is probably the most important form because it lays out all of our learning competencies and practice behaviors that are set forth by the accrediting body. We are going to have you work on your learning contract in the beginning of the semester. You create it. Your supervisor will review it, approve it, and you both sign off that the things that you put in your learning contract are acceptable and attainable. Your classroom instructor will give you a due date for when you have that first draft signed off on. And an important thing to remember about the learning contract is it's your responsibility. This is not your field supervisor's responsibility, not your faculty liaison's responsibility. This is a document that is yours and you are in charge of. So some helpful hints are to start working on it early. It's in your IPT account now, so you can start looking at it, start brainstorming ideas. You can ask your supervisor if they have learning contracts from earlier students that they've had. Sometimes they have those saved, sometimes they still have access to them in IPT. We do archive them every couple of years, so if they had a student 3 years ago and they can't see it anymore, just have them shoot us an email and we can pull it for them and send it to you. It's perfectly okay to look at them. You can talk to your peers. You guys can collaboratively work on ideas for the learning contract. Some of your placements are going to have a bachelor's student, a foundation student, and a concentration student. Just because you're different levels doesn't mean you can't talk together and share through ideas. Or if you have students who are in your class that are at different sites, there's also really great ideas you can gather from each other. If you're stuck on something, make sure you talk with your classroom instructor about it. Certainly you will spend some time in your class talking about learning contracts, but they're also there to help if you're stuck on something. We do have sample learning contracts available on our website that you can also review to get an idea of kind of the language and style that we're looking for. And again, due dates, check with your instructor of when they want it signed the first time, when it's due at the end of each semester, and make sure you're following those due dates. So when you open your learning contract, this is what it's going to look like. It is going to have a competency listed across the top of the box, and then specific practice behaviors listed down under each competency. You are going to take a look at what the competency is, and that's kind of the overall theme that you're working on for that section. And then they usually have 2 to 6 practice behaviors under each one, where it lists out what the behavior is, and then your responsibility is to put in these activities or products. How are you going to meet these practice behaviors at your site? When you add in that information, we want you to go ahead and put a date, just so we know if changes are made throughout the semester. We know kind of how recent this is. When you feel that you have completed a certain competency, go ahead and put in a date that you completed. That doesn't mean once you've completed that competency, you never touch it again. These are always ongoing behaviors. That just helps us know that you have done this, you feel you've done it successfully, and we can kind of check it off the box. So when you get into your semester, you're going to have your activities listed in the different boxes, your date added, your date completed. Once you have this first draft done is when you are going to review it with your field supervisor, and both of you are going to sign off saying, we agree that these are things the student can do at our agency to meet these skills. Then you're going to start working on them. At the end of the first semester, you're going to go in and you're going to give yourself a self-assessment score. And then you're going to ask your field instructor to also give you a score. This is on a Likert scale of 1 to 5. Make sure to reference the scale. It's on the top of the learning contract just so that you're not putting in scores backwards. There are also spots for you and your field instructor to enter comments as you're working on this. Sometimes it's talking about something you did really great and you really excelled at. Sometimes it's talking about things you struggled at and maybe why you think you struggled, things that you might need to work on for the next semester. So definitely you can put in comments and your field instructor can as well. On the learning contract is also a spot to document when your faculty liaison field visits are. So 2 to 3 times throughout your placement, your faculty liaison, who is your field instructor, is going to schedule a time to meet with you, your field supervisor, and if there are any other people at the agency that are heavily involved with your placement. This is an opportunity to reflect on what you've completed, talk about what's left to be done, problem solve, just make sure everything's on track. So it's your job to go ahead and document these in IPT by entering the date. Most of these will be virtual. So the method is like in person, on phone, or virtual, I think. And then a spot to put notes of if there were certain topics you discussed, certain things they want you to follow up on. So for our learning contract, one thing we always kind of say to keep in mind is the rules of half. About halfway through your internship, which is the end of fall semester, you should have about half of all the learning contract activities completed. And we want you to have a score about halfway between 1 and 5. So we're looking for 3s at the end of fall semester. And that typically is going to account for about half of your grade. Your classroom work also counts towards your grade, but your learning contract and activities from your site are every other half. The last form in IPT is going to be the one you look at the most often, is your time log. This is basically your timesheet where you're going to keep track of all your hours and activities. We ask you to review this regularly. I recommend every 2 weeks, just like you would for a paycheck. Your field supervisor needs to initial each week's entry for approval. We want you to include the hours that you were working on your internship, your activities that you did during that time. Ultimately, how often you update it and when things are due is again up to your classroom instructor and your field supervisor. So keep checking that syllabus. We ask you to always try to be ahead of your supervisor with having this information documented. Don't wait for them to say, hey, how's your timesheet going? It doesn't look like you've put anything in for a month. Could you do that? Try to just keep up with it on a regular basis. Include enough information in each week to remind you of what you did when you were there. And we ask that you don't sign the time log until you're completed with all of your hours at the end of spring semester. If you or your field supervisor sign this document, it locks it for any editing and changes. And so we will have to unlock it to get access back. Not a huge deal. Just email your field coordinator and let them know the form is locked. It happens at each internship at least once a year, but just try to keep that in mind to only initial, not sign. So this is what your time log looks like. Each week, you are going to put in information. You are going to put in the hours that you worked. So you're not going to put in that I was on site from 12 to 5 p.m. You're going to put that you were there for 4 hours. You can break it all the way down into 15-minute increments by using decimals. So like I was there 4.25 hours. I typically recommend trying to keep it at the half an hour. It just makes it easier in the long run for tracking. So you're going to enter the hours that you were there. then you're going to talk about the activities that you did during that week. This is going to help prompt you of what things you've done when you're working on your learning contract. It's going to help you when you're going through to do your evaluation scores. And it also helps our field team because when we're working on placing students for next year, oftentimes we'll take a look at your time log to see what kind of tasks and activities you did at your placement. And it helps us find good matches later on. These entries all auto-calculate, so you don't have to do any math, and it will go through and let you know how many hours you've completed. Your field instructor is going to initial each week. Again, don't sign until you're completed with the process. One thing that's on your learning contract that is relatively new to our learning contract is self-care. You can put up to an hour a week on your time log for self-care. We ask that you review with your field supervisor what you can and can't count. Every field supervisor has a little bit of a different idea on what is acceptable for self-care. Some are like, sure, a glass of wine and a bubble bath, that's self-care. Others really frown on that and don't want any kind of like substance use involved in your self-care. So just knowing what you can and can't count. Things that your peers can count, you might not be able to. So just proactively talk to your supervisor and let your liaison know what you're talking about. Oftentimes that's a big topic when you're meeting with your class is like, what did you do for self-care this week? And kind of bouncing ideas off of each other. Okay. Vicki, I see you're back. I don't know how long you've been here. I just saw your face a few moments ago. It looks like you've been keeping up with questions on the chat, but that kind of brings us to the wrap up for students that are entering their first placement. We are going to have our second placement students join us at 6:30, and we want you to stay on for that because we're going to go into supervision, COVID updates, and all that kind of stuff. So don't leave. Vicki, do you have some things you want to add? Did I miss anything?
Just thank you so much for covering. It is like the apocalypse up here in Belding, I have to say. So I'm really grateful. I don't even know what it looks like when I just dropped off. I do see that starting with Kylie, that maybe we could have a couple of lingering questions for folks, things that didn't get addressed to the detail that they want. And then also maybe if folks feel like they have had their questions answered, they could take a break, grab a Diet Coke or just stretch their legs and come back at 6:30. Super easy to answer is yes, the PowerPoint. You guys will have access to the PowerPoint. We'll be sending it out to you along with some version of a recording of what we've done tonight. And then I also wonder, back to Kylie's question about learning contracts and using examples. We've got some on the website, right, Rosemary?
Yeah, we do on the website. I believe it's, you go to like the School of Social Work, then there's a tab for field, and I believe it's under the section for IPT. And I can put a link to that when I send out the recording and the PowerPoint. And then we have some other documents that we're going to talk about in the second half that we'll be sending out as well. My goal is to have all that stuff sent out to you guys by Friday, but we'll see what our recording looks like.
And Jenna is asking about the self-care and about that it can be 1 hour each week as long as our supervisor approves, which is accurate. Yep. So it might be that your supervisor says that the only kinds of self-care that can qualify would be in your own sort of clinical work in therapy or journaling. You might have a supervisor who says taking a nap or playing video games counts. You might have a supervisor who says, I really only want you doing activities that can be considered self-care on site. So you're physically in the building, and what do you do when you're super stressed to come down from a tough meeting? Do you take a minute in your office, close the door, turn the lights off, and turn on some soft music? Do you go for a walk? Do you meet everybody in the lunchroom and sort of vent and debrief? So each supervisor is going to be a little bit different. Might even have a supervisor who says, I never got self-care and it never counted for my hours when I was in field. So it's not going to count for you either. You'll have to learn how to do it just like I did. It is ultimately up to your supervisor about that 1 hour per week. But that said, your learning contract actually has a goal, an objective, and it is a competency that you need to prove that you're learning how to take care of yourself to stay in this field over the long haul. So yes, it's up to your supervisor about those individual activities. Ultimately, it's on you, like most things in this internship are on you, to talk to your supervisor about why you think the activities you're engaging in would count as self-care, even if that is taking a nap. It looks like James is asking about the organizational ID. So I think, Rosemary, is it right for everybody, whether you're a supervisor or a student, that the organizational ID is WMICH, WMICH?
Yep.
And supervision hours counting towards your totals? Yes. Your supervision, at least 1 hour a week with your supervisor will count towards those either 400 or 500 hours. Also, you want to find out in your first or second at the most field class whether your field class hours will count, right? So welcome everybody, those of you who are new to the session tonight. If you haven't already signed into the chat, will you put your name in the chat so we can make sure that we're able to keep track of who was able to attend and who wasn't?
Hey, Vicky, I just asked, but I know everybody's putting their name in, so I don't know if you saw it or not, but do we need anything for class, for the field class?
That's a good question, Christine. So for those of you guys who are just joining us and those who started at 5:30, within the next couple of days, we're hoping to make some connections between you guys as students, your supervisors, and your classroom professors. Your classroom professors are going to be the ones who have your syllabus and all the assignments that go along with the academic part of your class. So stay tuned for that within the next couple of days. We're going to watch e-learning as well. That will have a Dropbox probably with your assignments in there. If worse comes to worse, I would say by the beginning of the week, if you don't know which class you're in or when your first class date is, or what your assignments are, you want to reach out to your coordinator. Rosemary and Mary and I have made a pretty concerted effort to be sure that you're all registered in the class of your first or second choice. So for each of you, it's going to be a little different about what sorts of assignments you have, when they're due, and what they are. So check your e-learning, check your email, and worst comes to worst, reach out to your coordinator by the beginning of the week if you don't know what's going on with your field class. I'm not aware that any of the field classes have a required text. Rosemary, I don't think so, right? We don't have
Not
any.
that I have ever known. Do they have a required text?
Yeah. So there are no books that you need to purchase or rent. You may want to review the NASW Code of Ethics because many field classes will ask you to be familiar with that. But in terms of prep or pre-assignment or reading work, you shouldn't have any of that for your field class beginning either next Wednesday, or the 13th, depending on whether you're a foundation or a concentration student.
And e-learning typically doesn't open for students until like the day classes start. So don't freak out if you don't see it in e-learning until September 2nd. September 1st, classes start the 1st.
So how is sound for you guys? Can everybody hear okay? It looks like Angel, I can see you pretty clearly. Is sound okay? Give a thumbs up. Yeah? Okay. Well, how about if we get rolling with this last half an hour and be good to go? We'll close you guys up right around 7, okay? Welcome to students who are just joining. You guys who are coming in are entering your second of 2 placements. And with any luck and grace, you are going to graduate in either April or June of 2022. So you need to get through this next academic year and this internship. And Rosemary and I are here. Rosemary is the coordinator for Kalamazoo. I am Vicki Pelini. I'm the field coordinator for Grand Rapids. Marion Triplett sends her regrets. She is from Benton Harbor, and she's also our field director. And between the 3 of us and our fabulous GA, Alyssa Hobson, we're going to help support you getting through this internship to the other side of the placement and graduation in the spring.
Just a note, we are recording so that we can share this with peers who were unable to attend.
Guys, let's be sure that you're talking about COVID very clearly with your supervisor and with your classroom instructor or liaison, right? The classroom instructor is the same person as your liaison. That's the person who gives you your grade. As of even today, the 24th, Western is not requiring our students to be vaccinated. But keep in mind that that may not be in line with what your field site is asking of you. If you have any questions or concerns about your vaccination status and your field placement, you're going to want to reach out to your coordinator ASAP so we can figure out what to do to support you. We have some students that have medical exemptions. We have some sites that are saying we won't take a student unless they're vaccinated. All kinds of craziness is going on out there, and each site, each student, each day is going to be different. So the more you communicate and the more you know where you stand, the better off we all are. Make sure that you're talking about backup options with your supervisor and your classroom instructor, because right now your site may be fully in person, it may be partially remote, it may be fully remote, and you may wake up tomorrow morning to a text message from your supervisor that things have changed. It's going to be probably a pretty fluid year that requires a decent amount of flexibility. So be sure that you're thinking about a backup option should your field site go to a completely remote status when it wasn't remote before. Keep in mind that our website has got some options for remote trainings and webinars that you could count as field hours with your supervisor's approval. And also, those of you guys who are joining us from your first internship, now this is your second. Remember that last year we let you finish up at 85% because our accreditation standards allowed us to do so. This year, we're in a different spot. We've gotten better at accommodating what we need to do in this pandemic. We've certainly gotten at least a little better at doing remote activities and Zoom and WebEx. So all hours are required this year in completion. So that's a full either 400 for foundation students or 500 for concentration students. There is no exemption of 85% this academic year. Those of you who are just joining us and you're in your second of 2 internships, there's a few things that are going to be different this year that you want to pay attention to. One is that your internship class, your seminar, meets far less often. Most of you were in class either every week or every other week during much of your placement in your foundation year. This year, you're going to meet a lot less often. Each seminar and each professor may be different. So you want to be sure that you check with that classroom instructor, that you know for certain when you're going to be meeting and in what platform. Is it going to be in person, partially virtual, all virtual? What are your classes going to be? You probably are going to range somewhere between 2 to 4 classes in fall, and probably somewhere between 1 and 2 this spring, which again, remember, is markedly different. And that's kind of cool, but that's also putting a lot more responsibility on being sure that you attend those classes. The other thing that's going to be different for your second year internship is that it is pass fail. This is not a letter grade. Remember last year you may have gotten a BA or an AB. There might have been some wiggle room in your letter grade. This year you are either passing and ready to take on the next adventure, or you're not. Your supervisor agrees that you're ready to go to second semester, or you're ready to join the field, or you're not. And just like the seminar classes, this comes with really cool freedom, but additional responsibility. The same thing is true about your actual passing credit for your fall semester. The rule of halves still applies. So halfway through your placement, half your grade comes from half of your activities on a scale halfway between 1 and 5. That is still true, but again, in the realm of credit, no credit, not letter grade. It's the same when you finish up your placement in the spring, that you want 4s or better, or competent or advanced competence in all your activities. The thing being different for your second year is that it's either pass fail. Your supervisor says you're ready to go, or you're not. And then additionally, what you want to pay attention to is that your learning contract is just going to be just a little bit different in the second year internship than it was in your foundation, your first of 2 placements. Keep in mind that all of our supervisors have committed to at least 1 hour of supervision every week, either in person or remote, every week that you're in placement. We ask that all of our supervisors have at least 2 years in the field, and if they don't, we identify somebody that can act as a secondary supervisor who does meet that criteria, either at the organization or through the school. If you have questions about that and you think that you may have a secondary supervisor or you need one, reach out to your coordinator so that we can figure that out. Remember that supervision is at least 1 hour a week, and that while your learning contract is your responsibility to create, your supervisor can help you with that and will subsequently confirm that the goals you create in your learning contract are the ones that you're going to be evaluated on in your placement. You'll have somewhere between 2 and 3 liaison visits. Keep in mind that's the same person who teaches your class, just like last year. So the person who teaches your class is also called your field liaison, and that person is probably going to meet with you remotely for, I would bet, most of your visits, if not all your visits. There'll probably be Zoom or WebEx, might be Teams, or whichever platform your supervisor prefers. And you can help get a jump start on that by connecting with your supervisor as soon as you get there and identify some options for dates and times that you could schedule that first field visit. You might want to think about having an agenda for your supervision. It's one thing to head into supervision and ask if your forms are done, if your documentation is on track, if what you're doing in your day-to-day work is what your supervisor expects. But if you have an agenda, you can also go deeper with your supervisor, and you can ask things like, why are you in the field? How long do you think you can do this work? What helps you stay in the work? Where do you see your career going? And having an agenda will help you also ask those deeper questions that are one-time opportunities. When this internship is over, you are not going to be able to ask those same questions of a professional that can help guide and mentor you in your work. So consider having an agenda, and absolutely be prepared and ahead of your supervisor in your supervision sessions. You might consider bringing in your syllabus or your transcript so that your supervisor can see what classes you're taking and what your classroom requirements are, so that you can bridge the gap between what's going on in the classroom and what you're doing in the field.
So we're going to talk a little bit about first day tips. Again, we talked about timelines earlier, but you may not begin your field placement before the start of the semester, which is September 1st. And if this is your first placement, if you're a BSW or foundation student, we are asking you to not start in your placement until after you have attended one of your course meetings. And that's with the exception of some training and onboarding. If your site has things they need you to do ahead of time, we're just asking for no direct client contact until after that first class session. Again, review your syllabus prior to reporting to your field placement, especially some of our students, their classes aren't meeting until that second or third week of September. So making sure you know expectations, policies, and those types of things before you show up for your placement. Important to know what time you start, be there on time, which is always 15 minutes early. Keep a notebook, journal, something with you to keep track of conversations. It's not unusual to have conversations in a hallway that are, things that you're going to want to recall later, whether it's scheduling issues, supervision notes, or tasks they're asking you to do. Talk about Western's requirements and give your supervisor a copy of our academic calendar so that they know when you have breaks. A lot of our sites are super understanding that you are a really busy college student. And so they will work around our semester calendar to make sure you have some time off for self-care and those things. Schedule your supervision sessions. Not all field supervisors will be available to schedule out supervision sessions in advance, but it's a good idea to try if you can. I know as I've been doing my professional supervision, we just have a standing Friday afternoon date. It is on the calendar every Friday at noon for us to do supervision. Not that we don't have to reschedule sometimes, but at least it's pretty consistent to make sure that we get good supervision in. For the long haul, professionalism is really, really, really important. Show up when you're scheduled. Communicate, communicate, communicate. If you need time off for a vacation, or you're sick, or you have a class project that you need to be off for, make sure you let them know. Our sites are really counting on you to serve their clients and to continue their missions. And if you don't show when you're supposed to, that really impacts the services they're available to provide, which in turn can affect your learning contract scores and ultimately your grade. Get in the habit of sending emails to reiterate what you think you've heard. If you talked about time and scheduling in your interview process or in your onboarding process, just shoot an email and say, we discussed me working on Mondays and Wednesdays from 12 to 6, just confirming that that is the schedule you're expecting of me. Just a professional way to make sure everyone is on the same page. Talk to each other. Your peers are a great support network for you. If you haven't already, You will be getting an email if there are other interns at the site where you're at. We try to connect you, whether it's a bachelor student and a concentration level student, or two concentration students that might not be in the same field seminar. We try to connect you if you're at the same site, just so you have another support person and someone to run things by. Use your healthy coping skills. We've all learned really great things in our classes. Now's a great time to put them to use. This is definitely a long and sometimes stressful process. And so keeping those coping skills fresh are going to be important. Focus on the big picture. You know, a good chunk of you, when this field placement is done, you're graduating and you are going to be looking at, you know, your career when you're done with this. And so while it can seem super overwhelming in the moment, especially starting off the semester with everything that you have going on, keep your focus on where you're going and in the bigger picture. Your faculty liaison is able to help you through this process. We've covered tons of information in a quick way tonight. Your faculty liaison has all this same information. That's what they're there for, is to help you through this process as well. So make sure you're using them as a resource. And keep in mind that if you ever think like, it's just an internship, like I'm not going to stress about it too much, or you know, my field supervisor was really reprimanding me for some behavior, but this is just an internship. It's not a big deal. It is a big deal, and you need to reach out to us. Let us know what might be going on, what we can do to support you. This is a professional environment that can lead to connections for employment later on. You know, a lot of people keep in touch with their field supervisor from when they went through the program 30 years ago, and keep them as a mentor and a contact in their pocket. So this is super important, super professional. Let us know if you have questions or concerns at any time. We have lots of great resources available. Our field coordinators, Vicki out of Grand Rapids, Marion from Benton Harbor, myself from Kalamazoo. Your peers are always great resources. We have lots of information on our website that has those sample learning contracts, forms that you might need throughout your time, even for your graduation audits and things later on. Our field manual is being updated and will be out before the semester starts. Tons of great information in there. We'll send you links for that. Please check your WMISH email on a regular basis. Lots of students maybe don't have the habit of checking that, but when you're in your field placement, that's where we're communicating with you. So please check that daily, multiple times a day. Your advisor also has great information for you about your field placement. They've all done field placements, so they can be a great resource. Of course, your course instructor, faculty liaison, and then any of our faculty members. We're all social workers. We've all done this before and can give you lots of great information. So what are your next steps? If you haven't been in contact with your field supervisor in the last week or so, please get in contact with them. Confirm your first day and when they expect you to start. Review those current safety protocols and procedures. As I mentioned early in the presentation, things are changing like minute by minute. Vicki and I had a site pull yesterday, and now we have to find new placements for students because they've decided the risk is too high to have students on site. So keep reviewing those protocols and procedures. Clarify again when you arrive, what time you need to log in for a meeting, anything like that. Make sure you have all of your onboarding stuff done. Lots of agencies require fingerprinting, background checks, immunization records. That is the student's responsibility to have that information done. We'll definitely assist you with getting that processed, but ultimately it's your responsibility. And we will connect you with peers that are at the same placements if we can within the next week or so. Your next steps for school and for your classes is to again confirm which section of field you're in, who the instructor is, when it meets, where it meets, how it meets. A lot of our field courses have multiple dates, so don't count on peer to tell you when class meets because their section might not meet the same date as yours does. Review again how it meets. In the very beginning, things were listed, in person at certain campuses, then everything was online for a while. Now we're back to, I believe everything is online with the exception of a class that Vicki is teaching, a section that has an in-person component. So just take a look at your course schedule, make sure you have the dates and times correct. Check that syllabus when it's sent out. That will also reiterate all the dates that are on there. Check if you have any outstanding IPT things, which at this point would be your student agreements. Let the office know or your field liaison know about any concerns that you're having before you begin. There's no point in being anxious and stressed when oftentimes it is just a simple question we can answer to alleviate some of those concerns that you have. If you are a concentration student or are bachelor's students that are just wrapping up their senior year, your graduation audits will be due soon and your advisor can help you through that. I believe October 1st is the due date for graduation applications for spring. So be in touch with your advisor about that process. Ensure that you have met your specialty requirements. If you're doing school social work, trauma focused, TFCBT, review those program plans, make sure you have all the classes that are required for those, and double check that information. So again, try to be a step ahead starting the placement, have that syllabus, your semester schedule, thank the people who interviewed you, who helped get you into your placement, who are getting you started on site. Start your supervision log. We'll be sending out that sample agenda. Try to get some dates set up for supervision. And then, of course, get some sleep. Once the semester starts, things move quickly. And so being rested up and ready for the start of the semester. For spring semester, you will have another field seminar class. It will be the same classroom instructor as you have for fall. The field team will register you for this spring course once spring registration opens, so you don't need to worry about that. And check with your professor for when those classes will meet. Typically, our spring classes meet much less often, maybe 2 to 3 times a year or 2 to 3 times in the semester. So just keep your eye on those different dates. Lots of great resources through Western. We do have free COVID testing and vaccines at Syndicuse Health Center. Again, vaccines aren't currently required for students. However, if you are on campus and you are unvaccinated, you do have to do weekly testing. And of course, masks are required on campus regardless of your vaccine status. Lots of great counseling services at Syndicuse. They are offering virtual counseling. That is a great resource no matter what campus you're at, to talk to counselors that understand the complexities of completing field placements, grad school, finishing up your senior year of undergrad, working, having families. So they're a great resource for counseling services. Western also has maps of lots of free Wi-Fi spots throughout the state. And one big thing to take a look at is our library services. Western has really great library services and a lot of remote services. So even if you're not on our campus or you're just not comfortable being on campus, they will send books to you. They will send resources to you. They will meet with you virtually to work on research projects. Just a really great resource to look at. And then a couple of questions that are pretty common from our students is, can you work through semester breaks? We did talk about this in the first part of the presentation, but just to kind of reiterate, You can work during breaks within the semester, so Thanksgiving, spring break, without any special approval. If you want to work over the semester break between December to January, we will need to work on that together to have you be able to be covered by the liability insurance. So please let your field supervisor and your field coordinator and your faculty liaison all know what you're planning for that break to make sure we get you covered with the liability coverage. What do you do if you have issues with IPT? So your first step would be to contact your field coordinator or our graduate assistant. Our grad assistant, Alyssa, works about 10 hours a week, so she's not in every day. So if it's an urgent need, for sure, start with whoever your field coordinator is, and we'll get you set up. A big question we always get is group supervision an option? Absolutely. If you have multiple interns at your field placement site, even if they are not within your discipline, you can do group supervision. Sometimes we have OT, PT, nursing, counseling, like all different disciplines doing internships at the same place. So absolutely group supervision is an option, and you can learn a lot from other students. We just do ask that individual sessions are still available for each student on a monthly basis. So yes, it's possible, but we still want you to have some individual stuff. Okay, so that's the end of our presentation with 1 minute to spare. We do have time for